All right, I want to talk about this. Is really kind of sad. The case of the youngest person ever diagnosed with Alzheimer's. They still have zero clue. A lot of times when they get young patients with Alzheimer's, it's either some kind of hereditary thing or an injury that affects the hippocampus. The hereditary thing is usually a messed up gene that adds a bunch of plaque. A lot of times there's some kind of injury, a brain trauma that creates that hinders the growth of the hippocampus, stuff like that. But this poor student in China had something like an 82% less a lower score than other kids, and they were a couple of years ago they were forgetting stuff and they couldn't figure out. But you know, Alzheimer's was the last thing on their minds. This kid is 19 years old, the youngest person ever to be diagnosed with the condition of Alzheimer's. And I just can't help but think this is going to happen more and more and more. And it's really disgusting and sad to think it's look. I'm the report right now. Doctors are saying they have no idea what's causing this. They know it's not an injury and they know it's not hereditary. So it's something else. So what could that be? It has to be environmental, right? It has to be. And environmental, I'm thinking it has something to do with the fact that Chinese are eating more pork than ever before. It has to be. That's one of the things that they keep linking to Alzheimer's is animal fats, proteins. You're not supposed to be eating that much and it affects your brain. And ever since I listened to that TED talk about Alzheimer's, and I've always been worried about this. That just seems like the worst fate is to start losing your memory. And Alzheimer's isn't just about memory. It's not like you forget where you put your phone. It's that you forget what a phone is. You forget what is a phone used for. You can and then your brain knows that you should know, but you can't. You're holding a phone and can't figure out what purpose this device, this object serves. That is horrifying to me. I can't think of a worse fate. This kid's 19. He's going to die like this, and soon, because it's getting worse. Now in China, they have high rises where they're putting more and more pigs into high rise apartments. I call them, just as kind of a wink, but they're putting pigs into these high rises where they never see the light of day, and they do it so that they can put more and more pigs in a smaller amount of area, stacking them on top of each other in a way that is just, well, better for business, let's say. Just better for business. Bacon hogs the spotlight in election debates, but reasons for its sizzling inflation are complex. Our politicians in America are talking a lot about bacon. They were talked about during the debates. They're talking about it because it's getting more expensive. But why? One of the reasons it's getting more expensive is because China is buying more of it. More of it. When China starts buying a lot of something, the price goes up. I remember when pine nuts used to be cheap. In fact, walnuts used to be dirt cheap. Nuts used to be cheap as heck, and now they're quite expensive. And the reason why is because more of them are going to China. There, Harris is blaming companies, and of course, Trump is blaming immigrants and Biden's policies. But it turns out that in September, bacon averaged about $6.95 a pound, 25% higher than 5 years ago, and that's in line with a 29% increase in overall food prices over that period. But they're saying also that this is in the AP, that presidential policy has little to do with what happens with food prices. Labor costs, when labor costs go up, it affects food prices. When global warming affects the supply of food that we're feeding to the pigs, that affects the price of bacon. It's always going to be a little bit out of control. It's also partly because bacon is a super processed product. According to the Labor Department, it's a big problem. Still, September bacon prices were 1.8% lower than they were last year. Makes sense, right? They're going down because inflation's going down. Bacon is always volatile because, among other things, they're subject to weather, animal disease, feed costs, seasonal demand, and according to Harris and other critics, price gouging. I don't know about the price gouging thing. I think the price gouging thing is real because companies that are private, like Cargill, that aren't accountable to the American people or even to any stock, shareholders, because you can't invest because they're owned by families. The largest companies that own our grain are controlled by private families that aren't accountable to anyone and don't even have to report their earnings. That's a major issue. So we don't even know sometimes about the pricing until it's way later. Giant food conglomerates. We also know that at the consumer level, only about five companies control the $1 trillion industry that is our groceries. You're probably buying from one of about five companies slash or families that are selling us our food. They control the prices at the end of the day to the consumer, but they're not as regulated as they should be, but they can't really go too far, can they? They can't. But with these processed products, they can, because bacon is super processed. They can hide it in labor and the rest of those things, right? It also happens to be in summer. Bacon goes up because people like to eat BLTs and bacon turkey wraps and things like that. They add bacon to everything, and of that of course falls into why it gets more expensive. Then the Ukraine happens. 50% of Ukraine's grain goes to animals across the world. And with that, when the Ukraine war happened, all of our food prices went up, especially when it came to animal flesh. And when you consider animal flesh food, you're going to pay more when there's a war in one of the largest grain suppliers of Europe. I think it's number two in Europe, Ukraine. It's one of the major reasons why places like Poland and the rest were building grain silos around their borders, and why Russia got very upset about that. It was a scary moment when NATO allies were building grain silos on their borders so that Ukraine can continue to sell that grain to the rest of the world. Do you remember? Do you remember how much grain was trying to leave through the ports? And Russia was stopping it, and then Russia said, "Okay, we'll allow that to leave. We're not going to blockade the grain." Do you remember all that? There's a reason why. U.S. inflation has tumbled from its peak in mid 2022, but food prices remained elevated. Yeah, it's been cushioned in part by a comparable raise in average wages. Remember COVID-19 in 2020, Smithfield's Foods, international villains, Tyson Foods, international criminals, temporarily closed plants in 2020 after thousands of workers got sick and some died. Do you remember when Tyson and Smithfields was literally forcing their workforce to continue during the time of COVID, and they were getting sick and dying? Thousands of people were getting sick and dying, and people called them essential. These ex-cons, these children, many times undocumented workers, these heroes supposedly of our food system, and they were being exploited. Well, a lot of those people got sick, a lot of those people died, and a lot of those slaughterhouses needed to close. That raised the price. Meanwhile, when those closures happened, the pigs got too big to slaughter. This is something that is extremely important. If you want to talk about something weird, you have animals that are getting too big to slaughter because we don't have enough people to slaughter them. So they were culled instead. Listen to what that statement is. While plants were closed, millions of pigs got too big to be processed and were culled instead, leading to shortages just as homebound Americans were shopping for more breakfast items, more breakfast bacon. So they were just throwing the pigs in the garbage, cold, because they couldn't slaughter them. Pigs are generally slaughtered at about 6 months old. So if a pig gets too big to fit through the machines and fit in the gas chambers, they just shoot them and put them in a ditch. Do you remember the videos of them putting pigs into ditches and either lighting them on fire or just dumping dirt on them or machine gunning them? Do you remember those videos? Because you can't put them through the gas chambers. They're too big. These animals are bred to be docile and fat. And so they can't be put through the gas chambers. Put them in the mass graves. That's what they did during COVID-19, during Trump's reign. Now, don't tell me that this is not going to affect the price of flesh. Demand from China jumped. We already talked about that. In 2020, US bacon prices rose to 6%. Exports to China jumped 75% as Beijing scrambled to replace hogs that were lost to an outbreak of African swine fever. There you go. 75% increase of demand in China. That will affect. This is why China's building high-rise slaughterhouses. That's why, because they can't afford to always be importing from the United States. And yet, right now, we're still exporting. We export so people always think that all the animals that we're slaughtering here are going. We slaughter thousands and thousands and thousands of horses here in America, and it's against the law to sell horse flesh. But we slaughter horses. Where do you think? What do you think's happening with those horses? What do you think? Tyson Foods required all of its 139,000 workers to receive COVID vaccines. That jumped the price. Tyson said it had spent more than $800 million on bonuses, vaccine clinics, and other COVID related measures. Bonuses. Who's the bonus going to? It was also paying more for packaging and transportation in a supply chain that had been mangled by COVID. To recoup those costs, the company jacked up the prices of pork by 25% in its 2021 fiscal year. 25%. They're not going to lose money on those pigs they dumped in mass graves. You pay for that. You pay for that. Anyway, what do you think? What do you think? California animal welfare law had an effect. Do you remember all the time people say that animal welfareism has no effect? It did have an effect. Turns out in 2018, California voters approved a law requiring more space for breeding pigs, egg-laying hens, and veal calves. Producers in other states must meet those standards if they want to sell pork, eggs, or veal in California. The pork industry sued, but supported by the Biden administration. Biden administration supported the pork industry, but the U.S. Supreme Court declined to overturn the law. And in 2023, July 1st, because not all pork producers are meeting the standards, less bacon is available to Californians, thereby driving up the prices. There you go. Well, Bartleby, what do you think? What do you think? But Harris vows to crack down on unfair mergers that give big food companies too much power to control pricing. I like that one. I think that would be great, more competition. But I don't mind the price going up. You're not supposed to be eating animals. You're not supposed to be seeing animals as products. You're not supposed to see them that way. People keep on telling me that they love to eat bacon. Stop eating bacon. Stop eating animals of any kind. Stop being part of this. You could count yourself out. Stop being part of it. Then you won't have to care about the price going up or down. Just step out, Bartleby. You're being stupid. I mean, I can't believe people are so I can't believe people are so blind. Like you see all this happening and you're like, I'm gonna keep buying and I'm just gonna complain about the price of someone else's flesh. If you are concerned about the price of a pound of flesh, then you, my friend, need to reevaluate your your position in this system. What kind of cog in the wheels do you want to be? You can be whoever you endeavor to be. Do you wanna be the one squeaking and squealing about the price of a pound of flesh? What an embarrassing way to spend your life. What an embarrassing way. If you believe in God, if God put you on this planet and your role is to be a cog in a machine supporting enslavement in the mass graves of your other of the fellow tribes of earth, the ones that cry and shit from fear because of you. And once they cry and shit and fear and die, because of you, and you have the nerve to complain about the price of a pound of their flesh. What an embarrassment you are, Bartleby. Oh, Bartleby. Oh, humanity. Do me a favor and leave a comment how you feel about the pound of flesh. Do you think it's going to affect the election? Will a pound of flesh affect the election? Let me know.